All right, so now that you're a little bit more comfortable with adding and subtracting negative numbers and maybe even have came up with some way to remember the rules on your own, I want to see if we can do this in an easier way. Now that we know what the rules are, that when we add a positive, it's the same thing as adding. Like in this first case, we take a number, we add a positive, that number gets bigger. It also gets bigger when we subtract a negative. So there are two cases where the number increases. When you subtract a negative, it increases and moves to the right. When you add a positive, it increases and moves to the right. The two cases where the number becomes smaller is when you add a negative number or take away a positive number. When these signs are different, we subtract. So we're losing 5 in both situations. So what if we were to just replace this plus positive 5 with just plus 5 and replace this minus negative 5 with just plus 5? Then we can kind of eliminate some of the confusion where you're not thinking what's minus negative 5, you're just thinking what's 0 plus 5 now, and what's 0 plus 5, or what's 0 minus 5, what's 0 minus 5. So I want to do a couple examples here. And you can pause at any time to work these problems out if you want to, or you can watch along. We have positive 3 minus positive 2. That is a positive minus a positive. We have opposite signs here. We have subtracting a positive. What does subtracting a positive do? It's subtracting a positive. We found that that decreases, so it's the same thing as just subtracting the number itself. So it's the same as saying 3 minus 2. Positive 3 minus positive 2 is the same as positive 3 minus positive 2. We could just write 3 minus 2. And 3 minus 2 is 1. So we're moving to the left when we subtract a positive. What if we are going to add a negative? It's the same idea. Adding a negative is this case, add negative 5, it subtracts 5. So by adding a negative 1, we're just subtracting 1. So 2 minus 1 is 1. It's the same as saying just 2 minus 1. This would be the same way. But now we're taking away more than what we have. So if you're going below 0, you're going 3 minus 4. Starting at 3 and subtracting 4 would be 3. I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and end up at negative 1. So 3 minus 4 gives us a number less than 0, but we're still going to the left 4 spaces. From 3, we're just going to the left. We're starting at 3, and I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4. I went to the left by 4. That's subtracting 4 from 3. And I end up with negative 1. So 3 minus 4 gives me negative 1. All right, here's where it's going to get a little tricky. I have a negative number minus positive 2. So I'm starting at negative 3, and then I'm going to subtract positive 2. Well, if I have negatives, I don't have any positives to take away, but we know that subtracting a positive is the same thing as just subtracting. So that's the same thing as saying negative 3 minus 2. And when you subtract something, you decrease or go to the left. So this is saying starting at negative 3, go to the left by 2. 1, 2. Now you're at -5. We've just moved to the left 2 spaces because we know that subtracting a positive gives us less of something. Taking away a number gives you a smaller number. If I were to use, I'm going to use blue to represent positive and red to represent negative to show you with the counters how that would work. -3, and I want to take away +2. Well, there's not any positives for me to take away. So I need to make some positives to take away. How can I add a positive to something that doesn't have positives? Add 0. We're going to add 2 zeros by doing a positive and a negative 0 pair. Now I have 2 positives to take away, and I'm left with 5 negatives. So now I've taken away the 2 positives, and I'm left with 5 negatives. The last example I want to look at is saying start with a negative and take away another negative from it. So take away more negatives than you have to start with. Okay, so let me redraw my number line here. So we're going to start with -2 and take away -8. What is that going to do? If you remember the rule, when you take away a negative, the number increases and moves to the right. So 0 minus -5 is the same as 0 plus 5. So -2 minus -8 must be the same as -2 plus 8. If I start at -2 and I add 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've added 8 to -2. So it's the same thing as saying 2 or -2 plus 8 equals 6. If I wanted to show this with counters that works, I have -2 and I want to take away -8. So I want to take away -8, but there aren't 8 there for me to take away. There's 2, but I need 8 of them. So I'm going to need 6 more negatives to be able to take away 8 of them. And if I add 6 negatives, I'm going to need 6 positives, so that I'm just adding 0 to my -2. So now when I take away 8 negatives, this is a little hard to see all the positives here. When I take away 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, I'm left with 6 positives. So -2 minus -8 gives me +6.